Um, I do need to start recording this webinar, which the information I will share in just a second. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the November edition of the Know to Prevent speaker series, the Youth Vaping Epidemic, What Parents Need to Know and How to Protect Our Kids. Know to Prevent is a collaboration among youth-focused coalitions and agencies in Westchester County with the common goal of empowering parents with essential tools to increase resiliency in our children and to reduce risky behaviors. For more information on the collaborative and upcoming presentations, please visit knowtoprevent.org. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. We are recording the presentation this evening, and a link will be emailed to all of you and will also be available for viewing on our website. The same email will also contain a survey link that we ask you to please complete. It will take less than 30 seconds, and your feedback is extremely valuable as we continue the speaker series throughout the year. The last item in the same email will be a handout called the tip jar, which will highlight takeaways, information, and prompts from tonight's speakers for you to keep as a reference. There will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you would like to ask questions, please type it into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation. At this time, I'd like to introduce one of our lead coalition sponsors, Linda Facina, who is the coalition coordinator for the Way in the village of Hastings.
Good evening. As Lisa said, my name is Linda Facina. I'm the coalition coordinator for the Hastings Working Alliance for Youth, the Way. And we are a group of parents, educators, and community members that work to reduce youth use of alcohol and other harmful substances in the village of Hastings-on-Hudson. With the current inability to hold in-person presentations, we are so pleased to be one of the organizing sponsors of this virtual speaker series. Let me now introduce our two distinguished speakers for tonight. Mimi Bublik has been a volunteer with PAVE, Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes, since 2018. She is acting director of education and has been conducting parent education as well as working on advocacy to ban flavored tobacco products. In the past, Mimi worked as a management consultant, helping companies on corporate strategy and communications challenges in the public policy realm. She has a BA from Cornell University and an MBA from Columbia and lives in New York with her family, including 3 children. Dr. Jonathan Avery is currently the director of addiction psychiatry and an associate professor of clinical psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College and New York Presbyterian Hospital. In addition to his clinical work, Dr. Avery teaches addiction psychiatry to the Weill Cornell medical students and residents of New York Presbyterian Hospital. He is the founder of the Addiction Stigma Institute that studies stigma towards individuals with substance use disorders and creates novel interventions to improve those stigmatizing attitudes. He was on the editorial board for the DSM-5 clinical cases book and is the editor of the books Co-Occurring Mental Illness and Substance Use Disorders, A Guide to Diagnosis and Treatment, and The Stigma of Addiction, an Essential Guide. He has won numerous awards for his clinical and academic work, including the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology Faculty Innovation in Education Award and the Outstanding Faculty Member Award from the New York County Psychiatric Society. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight, and I'll turn it over to Mimi to begin the presentation.
Thank you and welcome everyone. Thanks for having me and having Dr. Avery. I am humbled to be with Dr. Avery. He's an incredible partner of PAVE's, and a lot of the information you'll hear tonight comes directly from him and other doctors and psychiatrists and public health experts. So and that's one thing I just want to start by saying, which is that I am a parent. I'm not an expert, but all of our information is sourced and comes from very credible sources, including the CDC and others like Jonathan and Dr. Avery and around the country. So I will start if you want to forward the slide, please, Lisa. Just briefly going to talk a little bit about who PAVE is and how we got started. And then a brief introduction to e-cigarettes and vaping. Some talk about the national epidemic, just very quickly, some of the numbers. which are staggering. And then Dr. Avery will talk about the health effects, which is very important to us as parents, and also how to talk to our kids and what we can do as parents. So I do want to clarify that this presentation that we give is really for adults. I mean, kids can hear it, but the point is, this is really about protecting children, about protecting our youth. This is not, we're not trying to tell adults what to do and, you know, what to do in terms of vaping or smoking. This is really about protecting our youth by giving adults information about the dangers of vaping. So if you can advance the slide, please. So PAVE got started in 2018 when a JUUL representative came into our founder's 9th grade son's school and under the guise of an anti-addiction talk, and told the 9th grade class that JUUL was, quote, totally safe and was about to be approved by the FDA, none of which was true, but it set off a firestorm with these 3 moms who have been very dedicated, and as we say, big tobacco messed with the wrong moms, because they really did. And our mission since 2018 has been both to educate through things like this, events like this, and also to advocate for changes to the laws, including most importantly at this point, to get a ban on flavored e-cigarettes, and we'll talk about why. Next slide, please. So while PAVE started as a small group of angry, committed moms, it's quickly grown into a national organization with a presence in many states across the country. And PAVE has worked really hard as part of a larger coalition of very prominent public health advocates to get laws changed, including in New York State. So about a year ago, Governor Cuomo did pass a law in our state, which has been in effect since May, to ban all flavored e-cigarettes. So what you should see in stores and what should only be available is tobacco and flavorless vape products. We also happen to know that that's unfortunately not yet true, but it is great to know that Governor Cuomo did pass this in New York State. So, you know, we are really trying to be the voice of parents and families who have fallen victim to e-cigarettes and really, in some cases, have been devastated by it. So next slide, please. Thank you. So I really want to just talk briefly about what set off the youth vaping epidemic, which is in 2018, JUUL really led the way with heavy social media push. And, you know, they said they were trying to appeal to adult smokers, but you can see these pictures tell a very different story. These could easily be our own children. And in fact, we're not the only ones who think so. JUUL is currently being sued across the country for its marketing practices because they're directly targeting youth with this advertising. They had a heavy social media push using young models and social influencers. You can go forward. And directly targeting teens. And they even were advertising on Quizlet, which I'm sure some of you parents know is a website that kids use to set up flashcards. And so, you know, these unfortunately, between this and the story that I told you earlier about the 9th grade classroom, this led to PAVE and others holding JUUL accountable in a congressional hearing. But you know, they did since shut down. You can forward, Lisa, if you would. So this is just, you know, hosting events and sponsoring events. And if you go another slide forward, you'll see again using social influencers and then one more slide. So, you know, this is the kind of thing we're seeing now, which is during COVID, they're taking advantage of kids being alone and talking about, you know, needing a break from their parents. And I mean, that could easily be my daughter, that picture. So, you know, they are still out there. JUUL did shut down their social media, but not because, you know, because they got so much pressure. And I think what these companies know, I'm sure these companies know in what they're taking advantage of is that 90% of addiction occurs before the age of 21. So they know that if they get these, you know, kids hooked before 21, they're likely to have them for life. And, you know, it worked with our parents and grandparents, right? And unfortunately, it's working with these kids. So nicotine is highly addictive, and this is a really addictive form of nicotine. So these companies are not stupid. So that's why they're targeting them so young. Their customer base is dying out. They're dying of lung-related illnesses, smoking-related illnesses, and of old age. So they need a whole new market to target. If you go to the next slide, please. And, you know, you see in some of these, there's a lot of similarities if you look at both of these, and there's no mistake in that. JUUL is actually part owned by Altria, which is another name for Philip Morris. They made a 35% stake in JUUL. So again, you know, it's same old companies, same old playbook, just a slightly different product. And here, you know, I love these. This is, you look at these old ads, which I don't know if you remember, where you had doctors endorsing Camel. And now you have scientists endorsing vapes. And then on the right-hand side, you have the old Marlboro Man. And now you have the new Blue Man, right? So again, it's very similar, similar advertising. They took the playbook, they went and learned all about how they were targeting kids, and they went and did it with e-cigarettes. So quite similar. Next slide, please. So, and as you can see, it's worked. Over, you know, around 20% of high schoolers now vape. And fortunately, these numbers have come down since our last youth tobacco survey a year ago, which had over 5.3 million kids vaping. Now the numbers are 3.6 million kids are currently vaping. Unfortunately, the numbers this year are going to be a little bit off for, you know, they tend to be about a year lag. So our numbers for 2020 next year are going to be a little bit wonky because of COVID. So we're going to have to figure out how to analyze those. But the good news is they did come down. The bad news is 3.6 million kids is still well above what the FDA and others called a vaping epidemic in our country. And also, unfortunately, kids who vape are 4 times more likely to pick up combustible cigarettes. So we're also seeing a slight, you know, rise in cigarette use again, which we were bringing down the numbers very well. Most kids who vape start with flavored products. And so, the national averages are no different. The New York State is no different as well. Most alarming this year, the change in the use of disposables is quite alarming. So of kids who vape, there's been about 1,000% increase in the use of disposable products. And that's probably because some of the other products were taken off the market. So if you look at this data here, what it's telling us is look at the numbers on the left. And, you know, we did such a great job of bringing down smoking rates in our country among kids. You know, I think this speaks really positively to all the efforts that have been done between negative advertising about smoking and you know, great education push in our country about the dangers of smoking. And it's really reflected in the numbers on the left. Unfortunately, you look at the numbers on the right and, you know, in the blink of an eye, we have a huge explosion. 2017 was when JUUL came on the market. And since then, in 2 years, there was a 135% increase in use in just those 2 years alone among high schoolers, and over 200% increase in middle school use alone. So, you know, these are alarming numbers. We would like to get these down, and, you know, getting the flavors off the market is one way, but of course, education among parents and kids is certainly crucial. Next slide, please. So what are some of the reasons that kids are vaping? What we hear from our experts is, first of all, we know flavors are hooking kids. They're hooking kids and thinking that these products are safe for them. You know, when they hear advertising that says it's safer than cigarettes, what they hear is safe. And the flavors are really fooling the kids into thinking these products are safe. They taste good. How can it be bad for me? You know, so this is the main reason why public health experts and advocates are working hard to get the flavors off the market. Also, the advertising, as I mentioned, huge marketing blitz to our kids, making it look really cool. These products are highly addictive. It's a new form of nicotine called nicotine salts that, that JUUL actually invented. And it's much more potent than nicotine that you find in cigarettes. So one JUUL cartridge, which is a small little thing, it's about 200 puffs, is equivalent to over a pack of cigarettes worth of nicotine. So, and the nicotine itself is highly addictive. It hits the brain and body very quickly, and it gives kids this really nice buzz that they enjoy. But, you know, if kids tell you that everybody's vaping, everyone's doing it, mom and dad, you can tell them that that's actually not true. They might be getting social pressure, but the reality is that not every kid is vaping. I mean, you saw the numbers, it's in the 20s. So you can assure them that, you know, they can withstand that pressure. Also, there's a lot of change in the social norm because, again, you know, whereas kids would maybe not have smoked cigarettes lately, it's very cool, you know, looks very cool to vape now, and people are seeing it at parties. It's become more of a norm. Next slide, please. Also, there's always, you know, kids always talk about heightened stress, and I think now more than ever, kids really feel stressed at school and with pressures of college. Again, you know, kids are hearing that they're safer, and adults might understand what that means, but to kids, they hear safe. And again, we're not really concerned with what adults do, but really what kids are doing. In addition, these products are more affordable than cigarettes, unfortunately. Even JUUL, which looks super cool and is not disposable, once you invest in the original technology with the battery and everything, it's actually still cheaper than cigarettes. In addition, the disposables are very cheap now. So one of the other reasons that kids are gravitating to them. And then what our health experts tell us, and Dr. Avery will talk a little bit more about this, there is always a connection between substance use and mental health. So, you know, this is so, and we know that sometimes kids are self-medicating with underlying health issues like anxiety and depression. Unfortunately, these products also can cause anxiety and depression. So it's really two sides of a bad coin, I think. In addition, kids report this amazing head buzz. They get this nicotine kick, and it's very alluring and addictive to kids. So, and then one thing to point out on these products is that they're really accessible to kids. So even though they're illegal to sell to kids, even though they're supposed to be banned, they're not banned in all cities. In fact, unfortunately, New York State is one of the first to pass a full flavor ban. They're really accessible. They can get them at vape shops, at gas stations, convenience stores. I sent my son in to when he was 15 to try to buy vapes, and I've sent him since. He's never had a problem. So, you know, this is part of the reason that they're so they're just so accessible. And you know, with cigarettes, there's a beginning and an end, right? So you put a cigarette in your mouth, you can look at a pack of cigarettes, you can see you've smoked maybe 2 or 3 or 5, or you know when the pack is finished. With an e-cigarette, there's no beginning and end. There's no calibration. It doesn't tell you how much of it you've used. So the only way to know you've used it is when it's gone. And kids can go through, you know, multiple pods in a day, or you know, e-liquid containers in a day. So this has become a real problem for kids. There's just no way to calibrate. And well, I just want to go back, sorry, the disposables, I just want you to take a look at some of those devices, because these have become really popular among kids. First of all, they're packed with nicotine. And, you know, if you can see, they say 6% nicotine, some say 5% nicotine. If I were a kid, 6% or 5% of anything doesn't sound like a lot to me, but that is over a pack of cigarettes worth of nicotine in just one of the devices. The reason that kids are gravitating to these, first of all, they come in lots of great flavors. They're also super cheap, and I think they're easy to hide for kids. So some kids, you know, are afraid that their mom or dad might find their vapes or their cartridges or their chargers in their backpack. You know, these are just disposable. They can throw them away and don't have to worry. Next slide, please. This is another popular kind of device for kids. These are refillable devices. So basically you have to buy e-liquid separately and the device separately, and then you put the e-liquid into the vape, and then you use these. These are not disposable devices. One of the reasons I think kids love these is because there are 15,000 delicious kid-friendly flavors for them to buy, including gummy bear and cotton candy, banana split, Kool-Aid, Hawaiian Punch. You know, there's so many. And again, when they say they're targeting adults on this, I really find that hard to believe with all these kid-friendly flavors. Next slide, please. And I just want to mention, JUUL is losing a bit of favor for a variety of reasons. One is because there was federal legislation passed that did ban the flavored pods. But it's important to know that, first of all, JUUL started this epidemic, but also they had 70% of the market share. some of our kids are still addicted and still using JUUL. JUUL and other vapes are the same in terms of their, addiction level and ease of use and all of that. But JUUL now has about 60+% of the market, and it's probably going to come down because of the advent of all the disposables. But, they are really the ones through this sleek looking device that led the way. In fact, during this 9th grade discussion I was telling you about, when some of the kids were one-on-one with this guy, and the school did not know it was a JUUL representative, by the way, they only learned after. He pulled out the device and he said, check it out, isn't it so cool? And it looks pretty cool, right? Unfortunately, a lot of teachers can mistake this in the classroom for a USB charger or some other device that might be charging. But it's, really just, it's just important to know what they look like, and also those little pods, which are very, easy to conceal. Some kids actually can go on YouTube. There's a lot of YouTube videos that show how to repurpose those pods, open them up and put other oils in them, either nicotine or THC oils. So, it's just important to be on the lookout for those. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, in 2020, there was a federal flavor ban, but it really didn't go far enough. It left thousands of products on the market, basically only took away flavored pods, but it left menthol on the market, and it left all refillables and all disposables. And as you can see in the next slide, what happens when you don't take all flavors off the market. If you look at the orange bar, that tells you, where kids were in terms of using fruit pods and fruit e-liquids. And then, when they took that off the market, you could see a slight decline to 2019, but look at the blue line, that's mint and menthol. And, it just came up to meet the other line, right? It's basically, kids just want flavor. And if they can't get, their apple or gummy bear, they're going to go for mint and menthol. It's a very popular flavor. And in fact, I'm sorry to say, but not surprising, the tobacco industry has had a decades-long, well-documented history of targeting vulnerable populations, including African Americans, with aggressive marketing with menthol. And if you go on this really great documentary called Black Lives, Black Lungs, it shows them handing out packs of cigarettes in Black communities to get people hooked. And it worked. 85% of African-American smokers use menthol. So, this is another reason we want to get these products off the market. And then next slide, please. And then I just want to show you, so you're aware, that there are non-vaping nicotine products out there that are important, just so you know what they look like. The Zyn is a little pouch with flavored nicotine that kids can put in their mouths, and it releases nicotine. It's got as much nicotine, you see it's 6 milligrams, I think it says 6%. So it has a lot of nicotine, in it. And I think my sense is that kids might be using these during the day when they don't want to get caught vaping at school, but they really are quite addicted to the nicotine. And so they can put it in their mouth, it just dissolves, and they can keep the nicotine buzz throughout the day. The other one is Pixetine, which is a nicotine toothpick. So it's hard to say, I can make these things up. There's also now Lucy, which is a new nicotine gum, I believe, and it's being used by kids as well. Next slide, please. So you all may have seen, I have not seen these live, but sometimes police departments and others set up these mock bedrooms, so you can see where kids are hiding all these incredible, have these incredible hiding places for devices. But what's important to know is when you look at this, you don't necessarily see anything nefarious, but because these are stealth by design, there are devices, and if you can go to the next slide, you can see there are devices here. These are weed pens and nicotine, vapes. It's just important to kind of like be aware of what's happening in your kid's bedroom, and maybe check it out once in a while, because these things don't, they're really easy to hide. Next slide, please. I'll have Dr. Avery talk a little bit about the addictive nature in a moment, but just wanted to say, as I mentioned before, these are highly addictive products. This is not our parents' cigarette. And unfortunately, they are taking some kids. It's really hard to get off of. They're very discreet, and we've heard kids are using them day and night. They keep them in their pocket as sort of a security blanket. They hide them under their pillows at night and vape. They're so addictive, and they're just this type of nicotine is designed to go down smoothly, allows a deeper draw, a deeper inhale. It's just a new type of nicotine that is just more nefarious. Next slide, please. So the last thing I want to talk about before I hand it over to Dr. Avery is that kids will tell us, don't worry, it's just flavored water. And we can tell our kids there is 0% water in these products. In fact, all these chemicals you see here are in vapes. Depending on the brand and depending on the flavor, different chemicals are in different vapes. But propylene glycol and glycerin are pretty much all. There are chemicals that need to aerosolize these products. So the other thing to say is these products are not vapor, and you can tell your kids these are aerosols. So imagine inhaling hairspray. Like, I think that if the term were aerosolizing, I think that the companies would have a problem on their hands, a branding problem, because I don't think kids would actually perhaps use it less. I don't know if it said aerosol and not vaping, but these chemicals are all found in vapes, and some are actually, many of the same chemicals in vapes are actually in cigarettes. But what you see here is there are, some of these chemicals are toxic, some are carcinogenic. And even if you took all these chemicals away, the nicotine alone has been found to cause cancer in the lungs and bladders of mice in recent studies. So nicotine alone is a problem. And then if you took all these chemicals away and we're only left with just the device, there are metal coils in the device that need to get heated in order to start to disintegrate, and those small metal particulates are inhaled into the lungs. So again, there's just no good news here. Now I want to turn it over to Dr. Avery to talk about the effects on the body. You can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Mimi, for that great introduction, and thanks to the 80 of you that are here. My research is primarily on the stigma of addiction. That shows that our attitudes are worse towards folks with substance use disorder than towards any other medical or psychiatric condition. This is true throughout society, true throughout the medical community. And part of it is we just don't talk about it. We don't come together as communities to think about substance use, to think about our kids' behaviors. And so I'm excited, as always, to talk about this topic. And I'm excited that there's so many of you here, despite a pandemic, a recent election, COVID-19, racial unrest. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be thinking about this and to be stressed out yourself. And so give yourself credit for sitting here with us and thinking about this. I'm the director of addiction psychiatry at New York Presbyterian and Cornell. And we were pretty much high-fiving ourselves around here in 2017 that we had driven down the cigarette numbers. We weren't seeing any of it. And then we saw that huge spike, primarily due to the medical consequences at first. One of the surgeons here at the hospital wouldn't do any voluntary surgeries on kids if they had nicotine positive urine screens. And he wasn't seeing anyone for a while. And then suddenly he was seeing all the adolescents presenting for voluntary surgeries had positive urine screens for nicotine. He got me interested in it, a couple adolescent medicine folks. And we created one of the first addictions mini studies in the beginning of 2019 that was covered by Time Magazine and Katie Couric. And we sort of learned a little bit about how to treat it, about the addictive nature of things. And currently we have it's currently, unfortunately, no one funds addiction. And so we have a very small youth nicotine treatment program here at Cornell to sort of address some of these things. But the first step is thinking about it as a group, which we're doing here. And one of the first things to wonder about is, what does vaping do to the body? Was JUUL right when they came to school that it's safe? And of course, as Mimi was saying, they weren't. And one of the things, I'm an addiction psychiatrist, that I worry about especially, and I think you guys may have had a talk on this last month in your monthly seminars, is the effect of vaping on the adolescent brain. You can see all the issues that it causes. Early nicotine exposure, it's been shown in animal models and human models. hijacks the reward pathway, makes one more at risk to misuse other substances. We actually think nicotine is more of a gateway drug than even marijuana, nicotine and heavy alcohol use. And then it definitely increases the odds of anxiety, depression. It's not good. Nothing we learn about nicotine is going to be good later on. And I think especially the high concentrations of nicotine really get to the brain quickly, rework that reward pathway quickly. And so once someone's been smoking for a while, the biggest dopamine spike they're going to get every day in their brain is about smoking, is about vaping. They're not going to get that dopamine spike about playing with their friends, certainly not about talking to their parents. And basically their behavior just gets wired in a way where they think, I need to use this. I need to use this. And as it sort of takes over in the brain, if you could advance the slide, please, it starts to impact other areas of the body. We'll talk about EVALI, which was mainly seen with some of the marijuana cartridges in a second. But we're certainly seeing, and this is new, so the data is still in its new stage, but we know all the contaminants in this are harmful for the lung. We've had a number of early studies showing its role in causing inflammation and asthma, causing downstream cardiovascular disease. And certainly the long-term data is not going to be good. We're not going to have that study in 5 to 10 years and say, oh, it turns out vaping was really actually very healthy and we should all be doing it. I think we're going to learn more and more the type of chronic lung injuries that are going to result from this. I mean, we've obviously studied cigarettes for decades, and so we know what that looks like as an end stage, but we don't quite know yet what it looks like for these vaping devices. But certainly the early reports are not positive. We'll expect more trouble later on. Next slide. So one of the things that's overlooked, sometimes folks think just nicotine alone. If you forget all the other contaminants, nicotine is sort of the active, psychoactive ingredient that hijacks the reward system. And they sometimes think all these other contaminants are the ones that cause all the trouble. But nicotine itself can restrict blood flow. That's why the surgeon here at the hospital didn't want his patients to be using nicotine preoperatively, because he was worried that if the blood flow wasn't ideal, that it would impact bone healing and other outcomes. And so, in many different ways it impacts blood flow, can constrict the blood vessels, can increase blood pressure, certainly impact adrenaline and heart rate, and especially for those that are vulnerable to such things. And it goes on down the list, right? Weakened immune system. There's been some reports of seizures. People sometimes use it for weight loss. It can cause unintentional weight loss, GI distress. And then certainly one of the problems about regulation overall is that people turn to black market products that are especially have weird contaminants and other stuff. People start cooking up their own e-liquids or making devices that carry more risk. And there's all these reports about explosions, broken teeth, flame burns, chemical burns, blast injury. And so there's a lot of ways that this can certainly go wrong throughout the body. Next slide. So EVALI, a lot of folks heard about this. This was big news pre-COVID in terms of the catastrophic lung injuries that were happening. Possibly associated with vitamin E acetate, possibly in these sort of bootlegged home-created products for THC. But we don't quite understand all the ways that severe lung injury is happening. Certainly folks we saw here in the hospital said they were using the regular devices and not with the THC contamination, were coming in with some catastrophic lung injuries. And you can see the number of hospitalized cases was many from all 50 states, with even some reports of death. I think, once you open yourself to needing nicotine, once things are restricted, once you start experimenting with marijuana a little bit in these products, it sort of invites more experimentation, which can lead to these riskier devices, which may be especially associated with EVALI. I often give this talk with a pulmonologist here at the hospital, and they were so overrun with people in the city of EVALI coming in for presentations that they had to turn a lot of folks away. But certainly once breathing issues develop, it might be worth seeing a pulmonologist, and often they're doing a lot of the prevention efforts here at the hospital. COVID-19, we're still learning all about COVID-19 and vaping, and certainly youth who vape seem to be more at risk for COVID-19. It just makes sense. One of the vulnerabilities is having a weakened immune system, a weakened pulmonary system, and certainly vaping isn't going to protect you against it. And vaping also invites a lot of behaviors that you might not normally do if during COVID-19, right? You got to take the mask down if you're out in public. You often do it with friends or social groups where you can be sharing devices. So, there are a lot of ways that it can increase contact with at-risk people, make you more at risk. And certainly, this was wondered about more early on, why more youth in the United States were effective. It might be from the increased number of youth who are vaping here. Next slide. All right, the 10 signs of teen vaping. This is the real hard thing. And I think, and Mimi touched on it, part of why kids like these devices is you can use them undetected. I mean, a lot of kids, by the time they see an addiction psychiatrist like myself talk about their parents tackling them, frisking them, I mean, it's hard. When I was a kid, you knew who was smoking and drinking because you could smell it on them. You could smell the cigarette smoke. These days, it's hiding in plain sight, as you saw. It's unclear what they're using. They've developed all sorts of clothes where you can fit it in the clothes. It's a popular social media game to do it in front of your parents or do it at school without the teachers being aware of it. Certainly things have changed now that most of the kids are at home, and maybe even easier to use undetected if they're in their bedroom all days. And so, it's so hard to tell what's cooking with adolescents. Sometimes you have no idea because they're going through adolescence, and a lot of the signs of addiction could just be the sign of them going through a breakup or just being their grumpy selves. But there's some things to keep in mind. So, frequent excuses to use the restroom, go outside. I see a lot of folks pre-COVID who wouldn't go with their parents on vacation because they were worried about being in nicotine withdrawal, which I need to talk about in a second, or worried about being away from their devices. And certainly once you're in the middle of it, the urge to use gets stronger the more you're without it. And so you can see yourself frequently excusing yourself. Adolescents smell funny. I mean, there's no way around it. If you could go back to the previous slide, and certainly there's these odd smells that comes with these devices. People try to mask it in all sorts of ways. Again, it was easier with cigarettes, but it's tricky with these flavored devices. There can be some subtle changes to their mucous membranes. And then certainly if they start getting all these tech devices around, it might be worth taking a look at some of them. All right, next slide. Certainly secrets. I mean, one thing we always say in addiction is that addiction hides in the secrets. It pushes people away from their friends, from others. As I was talking about the stigma of addiction, it exists in society, it exists within families. And so one quickly moves to hiding addictive behaviors. And there's a part of everyone who's addicted who both, wants to tell people about it, doesn't want to hide, but then there's a part of them that's really shameful and wants to tuck it away. And that makes it really hard both for themselves to be honest about it, and then you see it in their behaviors. Certainly changes in sleeping patterns. If you're vaping using nicotine around the clock, it often awakens you at night as you get into subtle nicotine withdrawal at night. And then certainly, it has some of the physical consequences listed there. Certainly a lot of anxiety, irritability, mood swings. I think one thing, I'm not sure we even have a slide on, but one of the things that propels youth nicotine use further is the fear of withdrawal. Certainly the brain gets hijacked from a reward pathway, but also nicotine withdrawal is just so brutal. People feel anxious, they feel depressed, they can't focus, and they really feel the absence of the nicotine. And that's true for a lot of substances, be it opiates, marijuana. It's really a lot of the withdrawal that propels one forward because withdrawal feels terrible. And the funny thing is when you use substances around the clock, you think it's helping you with X, Y, and Z, but most of that is just because it's helping mitigate withdrawal. It's all the studies show you have the same, if not worse, anxiety, depression, whatever, when you're using substances daily, but you feel relieved when you take it. And a lot of that isn't even the psychoactive properties of these things. It's just fending off withdrawal. And a lot of that plays out in anxiety, irritability, and then certainly eating habits, weight loss. I like the term Nick sick. I mean, it can definitely cause a lot of issues. Next slide. All right, what can parents do? This is some of my most unpopular advice as I give these talks, and I'm a parent too of two kids. It's easier for me to say it to you than to do it myself. But the first thing we have to do is sort of be aware of our own behaviors. Be aware of our own consumption of substances. I mean, this is so, COVID-19 is as tough a time for parents as it is for kids. We're drinking more, we're smoking more. Some of you may be vaping or drinking more than you want. And the problem is we can't talk to our kids about these things until we're sort of put our own oxygen mask on first, right? We can't talk to them about our own mental health. We can't talk to them about coping better. We can't talk to them about substances after we've had our glass or two of wine to get the courage to talk to them about the substances. We sort of have to model what we want in them. And that's especially hard nowadays, right? I mean, we're stuck with them in home. We're all stuck together. I mean, it's as hard as it can be. And so certainly be mindful of your own substance use, be mindful of your own mental health issues. And there are a lot of ways to become an advocate and stay informed, such as coming into talks such as these. Next slide. So one of the key things to do, I think, is to start talking with your kids early about substances and about mental health issues, both about issues you've had in your own family, about issues that the idea is to highlight early to them that this is important to you and them as a family. Because one of the hardest things to do is to play catch up once substances have started or once the kid has distanced yourself from them. And so the idea is to talk and keep talking in open, non-judgmental ways about substance use and mental health issues, to highlight to them that it's important for you, it's important for them. And the reality is that you're going to be rejected like crazy. To be a parent is to tolerate tons and tons of rejection. But that's okay. I think long as you're highlighting it to them, that's important. There's a part of them that really wants to connect with you, that wants to please you. And so even as they're doing the behavior, they'll be thinking, I don't want to be a bad kid, right? And I don't want to be problematic. And they'll remember that you've talked to them early and often about it. And so then if they do get into trouble, be it with their mental health or bullying or whatever it may be, they can know that it's important to you as a family and will be ready to come to you with those issues. Not always. And one thing about addiction is it affects all of us across the socioeconomic spectrum, no matter what parenting style you have. So these are sort of tips, but knowing that, for a range of circumstances, from trauma to a number of unforeseen factors in one's peer group or otherwise, that addiction can take a hold. But these are some tips to sort of keep us on the right track as we go through this. All right, next slide. So definitely do your homework, speak to the facts. I think, one thing that happens is that these conversations also often take place in crisis moments, right? And so you're screaming at them and shaking them. You're going to die. Why are you doing this to our family after all I've given you? And, the key is that we have to come calm, check our own pulse first, and just talk about the facts open and honest as you're hearing about here. And the reality is that, I talked about some of the catastrophic things that can happen, including the severe lung injury, but most people don't explode spontaneously, right? And so if you're leading with you're going to die, they're probably going to be like, think again. And so you just have to be honest that this is risky. This is something we worry about. And I like the advice to be clear that it's not something that you approve of. And there are a lot of ways to do it that can be open and can be honest. Next slide. So find the right time. And yeah, I think be opportunistic. You certainly see vaping on the news. You see vaping in schools. Certainly, I've been into a number of high schools and middle schools, so I know talks like this are happening. And as I said, early and often, it's important to know about, kids want to keep things private, and that's fine. And, you should know that when your pediatrician asks you to leave, they're often asking about substance use, especially when you're an adolescent, and because they want to respect the kid's privacy, giving them an open, honest space. And you can always say, you can come see a talk by Avery or talk to your pediatrician or whatever it is. And there are a lot of folks, not just me, who are, interested in thinking about this with you. So when to get help is really one of the trickiest things to think about. And I'll talk about it for just a second here. Because the reality is that a lot of kids will experiment and not get into trouble. But there are certain people, and these are the risk factors to keep in mind, either for mental health reasons, anxiety, depression, ADHD, or for a family history of addiction, or because they've just been exposed in their environment to a lot of it, that will find it very hard to quit. So again, most people will be able to use casually and be able to stop. But some folks, and especially those with mental health issues, especially those with trauma, especially those with family members with addiction, will struggle to get off it. So if your kid is one of those in those categories and you see them beginning to experiment and getting stuck, those are folks we want to intervene on as early as possible. Get them to the pediatrician, get them to a psychiatrist. Um, and then certainly for any kid, once they've sort of gotten stuck in a way that they can't change behavior, when their functional status is going down, those are good spots to jump in. Mimi, you had some thoughts?
Oh, no, no, I was just gonna, if you're done with the medical, just gonna say where we can get help with our kids.
Yeah.
Other than doctors, obviously that's your first point of contact. I will say that some pediatricians are still in the learning phase. And we've heard some pediatricians say, oh, you know what, at least he's not smoking or she's not smoking. But that actually now more pediatricians understand the health harms for kids and are starting to have these conversations. But we're educating pediatricians as well. I mean, not we, but the, you know, society. And really, we have to do that. And I think more and more pediatricians are really understanding the harms to our kids and how addictive these products really are and how they're leading to other products. So I just wanted to share that there are some resources that are available. I feel like some of these are really nice for kids because they're private. Like the Truth Initiative has one called This Is Quitting. And it's a really nice, it's an AI kind of driven app that they can put on their phone. It gives them daily reminders and support. Oh, sorry, if you can just go back, gives them daily reminders and support. And actually, the Truth Initiative, This Is Quitting, also has a parent equivalent. I actually tried it just to see how it is, and it also gives the parent daily reminders and support, and it says, do you need more help? And you can click on, and it kind of guides you through. It's not a human, but it really is helpful, and I know tens of thousands of people across the country are actually using it. There are actually live chats as well that you can have with people. Certain states are different. Not actually sure what New York State has. Dr. Avery, do you know if they have like helplines that are, you can speak to a human?
Yeah, I think the city does have different resources now that you can call. I'm not sure if you get a human necessarily, but you definitely get resources. So I think they do. And they also can connect people to different, I think what's happened in the setting of this epidemic is that a lot of the traditional smoking cessation services that provide nicotine replacement treatment, which is at times needed, or medications to help, they've increased the access of these things to especially late adolescents who are struggling to quit and they need meds or nicotine replacement treatment to get off these substances. And once, I mean, the struggle is that a lot of them have older folks still, but there's certainly groups now in the city that cater more to younger folks, as does our youth nicotine program.
And what I've heard from you is that often once you talk to a kid and understand where they are in this journey, that there's a combination of perhaps medical therapies that might be normally used for adults, but that you can titrate to kids, as well as perhaps some cognitive behavioral therapy or other kinds of therapies. So.
Right. If they're struggling to quit and it's for psychiatric reasons, we really want to make that a robust treatment for them. So get them to see a therapist, often with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy styled interventions to address both the anxiety and to create strategies to stop. And then some people, I mentioned how bad nicotine withdrawal, some people for genetic reasons, family history reasons, can just not tolerate it, or they've been using so much. And for these folks, it really requires nicotine replacement treatment to have a smooth exit from the device, especially because it's really hard to change behaviors when you're feeling so lousy. And so that nicotine replacement sort of allows a graceful exit off of the nicotine for those that are really struggling to quit.
And some great advice we received from someone who is a panelist. She said that the Westchester County schools, there are student assistant counselors who can speak to parents and students about local resources and referrals, as well as meet with students and or parents. So if they're willing to put themselves out there, you know, they may not feel comfortable because it's in their community, but if they are, that's a terrific resource. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that one. If you can go to the next slide. I also just want to share for schools and parents, you can definitely encourage your schools to do this if they don't have vaping curriculum as part of their, you know, anti-drug programs. There are two that we highly recommend, and they're free. They're super easy to use. One is out of Stanford, it's the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit, and one is through an organization called catch.org, and it's the Catch My Breath program. And, I've looked through them, they're really user-friendly. Sometimes PE teachers who don't have any health specialty are asked to be health teachers. Anyone can do it. The PE teacher can do it. It gives you slides, talking points, and programs for kids. It's a couple of day program, so you have to commit the time. But if they're willing to commit it, these are really good programs to recommend. The next slide. So that is the end of our formal program. We're going to take some questions. I would ask, I know you're going to do a quick survey on email, but for us at Parents Against Vaping, we would love your feedback. This is also a very quick 30-second survey. If you can just basically open your camera, I think we're also used to QR codes now with menus and so forth. Open your camera, it'll prompt you to tap on something at the top of your phone and it will open the survey. If you could leave the actually show this first, but if you have any questions, you can always reach me at Mimi at parentsagainstVaping.org or info@parentsagainstVaping.org. And so feel free to reach me with any questions, and Dr. Avery, I believe as well, is available. So if we could just leave the QR code up maybe during the Q&A, that would be great, so people have a chance to fill that out. We received some questions during. Should we get to those first? And then I think some were emailed in as well.
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much, Mimi and Dr. Avery, for sharing all that informative information. I've heard you speak, Mimi, before, and every time I learn something new. So I really do appreciate on behalf of everybody that's in attendance. So at this time, we will be moving into our Q&A session. If you have not already done so, please feel free to type in questions in the Q&A box. While you're doing that, just a few reminders. Please be on the lookout for the email that will include the recording from tonight, the event survey, along with the tip jar handout. Hopefully everybody has completed the survey. I will share that with everyone in the email as well for you to complete. And Linda, did you want to start questions at this time?
Sure. So we'll start, with some of the questions that came in while we were giving the presentation. And the first one, I think probably Mimi can address. It was about when you were talking about the flavor ban. Someone questioned, are e-juice flavors that are sold in the bottles also banned?
So yes, in New York State, again, they are still widely accessible. Dirty little secret, but many other states, there are very few states that have actually had a full flavor ban. I think Massachusetts and a couple of others, but they're unfortunately still widely available. Okay. But they were banned in New York. And if you see them, by the way, and you want to report it, you can report through the FDA. If you go on the FDA and click on report retailers, you can do that. So, and I unfortunately highly recommend it, because the enforcement right now is really pretty weak. I mean, I'm sure COVID is exacerbating that, but I think that enforcement in general has been slow.
Okay. Dr. Avery, I think that this is probably for you. Someone asked if there is passive smoking with e-cigarettes, secondhand smoke, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's some evidence that it can lead to some harms to people in your immediate vicinity, although the data's not definitive yet. One of the things we saw early on in the vaping epidemic was pregnant women actually being recommended to use these devices, and we think there's certainly harm for the unborn child for these vaping devices. But in terms of secondhand smoke, it's a little unclear to the degree that it can cause harm. I think we're expecting to figure out more. I mean, one thing that's true more so with marijuana is it seems like that might be even more the case with marijuana product, that might have more risks of secondhand contamination than with nicotine, but it's unclear.
And there's also, I just want to mention, which we never heard of with cigarettes, but something called third-hand smoke, which is, or vapor, which is that, because it's an aerosol, imagine it's like hairspray. So it goes into the air, dissipates, but then it lands on things. So it lands on clothes, it lands on furniture, it lands on carpets. So for people with, small kids walking babies crawling around, can get on their hands and into their mouths and things like that. So third-hand vapor is actually a real thing.
Okay. All right, Dr. Avery, I think this would be for you. Do kids use alcohol to override the impact of vaping to help them sleep? And the second part of that question was, do they use marijuana in that way as well?
Right, they certainly use both in that way. And the where we worry most about substances is when they become answers to questions too, right? There's one person who's using it socially with peers, and then there's another person who starts to use these things to self-medicate a lot of states. And once you're self-medicating, you're in trouble. And so often we see people, medicating their anxiety or their attentional issues with nicotine during the day. And then it lends oneself to saying, hey, if I can feel a little better during the day with nicotine, I bet I'd sleep a little better with marijuana. And you know what? I'm still feeling a little on edge. Maybe a drink or two would be a good way to a nightcap. And so it is this slippery slope that we see. And, the addictive pathways have been activated too, so they may take a hold when you use them in that way. They invite some experimentation to feel better. And I think that's a risky spot to be in for any kid or any person when you start playing sort of pharmacologist with how you're feeling. And the tricky thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that you don't realize that with time, whatever you started using it out for later becomes your brain just says, I need that molecule because I'm so used to it. So it's not even helping with those things anymore, but you need it all of a sudden to do anything. And then the sleep is just as worse. The anxiety is just as worse. The attentional issues are just as worse. I mean, some of my favorite studies in substance use are people who are using substances versus not. The people who are using substances always think they're doing better on tasks than the people who aren't. And they're always doing worse. And so, you get in these false cycles of thinking it's helping when it's actually harming. And I certainly see people accumulate substances to medicate.
Okay, I'll let Mimi start with, this is a tough question, I think. How do we get teenagers who know everything already to listen to us? And how do you educate about the harmful effects and not have it dismissed?
Well, I have 3 myself, and I'm not sure I'm doing such a good job, but I do think, avoiding fear tactics, which has always been my strategy, it really doesn't work. I do think starting young and I think coming at it with a non-judgmental approach is really helpful as much as we can. And also recognizing and helping kids recognize they were duped. They were really duped into thinking these products were safe, that they were good for them, that they weren't addictive. There weren't even nicotine labels or warnings on these original products that said, warning, this product contains nicotine, an addictive substance. So this industry really did, take advantage of a situation. And I think starting that way, it kind of takes the blame off of them. At some point they need to take responsibility, but I do feel like, if we can come at it with a non-judgmental approach, it might be helpful. I'm sure Dr. Avery has something to add to that.
Yeah, the other thing that happens sometimes when you think you're right and the kid thinks they're right is that things just repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat until, there's going to be violence at home. I mean, it just drives everyone crazy, right? And so I think you have to communicate clearly what your concerns are, but we can't beat them to death with this information. And because we do want to keep them coming to us. We don't want to push them to the secrets and the things. We want to keep them engaged. And so sometimes you need to lose a lot of battles before you win the war. And so that's why engaging them early on and highlighting the risks and not sort of beating them over the head with it, I think is the way to go. And
sometimes, I feel like I know so much now, but I have to recognize that not everybody has this information, or it's repeated for me every day. And I'll just say to them, look, I don't mean to bother you, but if I find new information, if I'm hearing new research, I'm going to share it with you. I'm just going to text it to you. There doesn't have to be a commentary on it. I just want you to know what I'm learning as I'm learning it as well. And maybe it'll help you make more informed decisions. And that's all I really feel I can do at this point.
Okay, we have a question that came in from the audience asking, what is the best approach if you have a young relative that's vaping and their parents are unaware? And would you suggest telling the parents as soon as possible? I don't know which one of you might want to tackle that one.
You want to go for it?
I mean, for me, addiction hides in the secrets, and as much as we can get it out, so we're all playing with it and talking with it, the better. But it's hard, right? I mean, you don't want to lose relationships because of it, and this is an interesting one where it's sort of not your child or your, you know, or someone that's in your primary family. So that's tricky. I would err on the side. I would talk to the person first and let them know that, you know, you're concerned about it and you're thinking about telling their parents. Would we be able to talk about them with it together? That sort of thing. But if that doesn't work, you know, I would probably recommend telling the parents, to tell you the truth. I hate to say it,
And I feel like
this is, you don't need to carry other people's secrets with you. And I think that's sort of the codependency. I hate that term, but you know what happens when you have loved ones with addiction is that you start carrying it with you yourself. You start behaving in ways you wouldn't, and reinforcing secrets and all those other things. So, but it's hard.
parents have to keep the circle of trust. So if I get some information from a parent, I will share it with my child, but I will never reveal where I got it, and just say, look, I know this is happening. I just want to have a conversation. I'm not going to share who gave it to me, because it can risk losing a friendship, I feel like, with the younger, whoever, you know, if it was the child who told the parent. So, you know, we parents have to all stick together a little bit on that and not divulge. That's how I feel. But
Okay. This is actually a question about ADHD. So perhaps Dr. Avery, it says, substance abuse is not uncommon among those with ADHD. Does vaping help ADHD symptoms the way Adderall should? And what are the risks of mixing Adderall and vaping in terms of timing, long, short release, etc.?
Right. I mean, ADHD and its relationship with substance use disorders has been much studied and discussed, and is interest to us all the time. I mean, as I said earlier, all mental health conditions increase your odds of developing a substance use disorder, so anxiety, depression, but also ADHD. And it's very clear that, I mean, what's different about the treatment of ADHD versus other substances, those other disorders, is that it is with a substance that is potentially addictive, these stimulants like Adderall or Ritalin. But the studies are very clear that ADHD treated, even with these what are quote unquote at-risk substances like Adderall, decreases your odds of developing a substance use disorder. So you need to treat ADHD. And often I see folks with untreated ADHD smoking to try to get some intentional benefit. And when you get them on a stimulant, they stop smoking. If someone is using nicotine and these vaping devices and their medications, one thing that is true about nicotine and some of these devices is that they tend to decrease one's medication levels. This is especially true with traditional cigarettes, but maybe true with the vaping devices. And so it may be countering the stimulant a little bit. Also, withdrawal states from nicotine products can make one very inattentive. And so you end up, if you're in ADHD, you have attentional difficulties, you're taking something that may be decreasing your medication levels, and then you're having these spikes of attention and inattention throughout the day. And that can make the course of ADHD much more challenging. You add those two together, it might contribute to insomnia and difficulty sleeping as well. And if you have trouble sleeping, then you also have trouble attending during the day. And so it's best to not, as we've been talking about, not use nicotine if you have ADHD because of all these interactions.
All right, thank you. We just have a couple more. So if people have additional questions, they should definitely type them into the Q&A, but we have a few more that, oh, now I see we have a couple more that came in. So one is what to do if vaping's been going on for a few years. If you aren't, you didn't catch it early and it's been happening for years, do you have any suggestions for how parents might deal with that with their children?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can keep in mind if it's been going on for a few years, that it's going to be a very hard behavior to stop. It's probably been really woven into their life and into their behaviors and become the answer to a lot of questions throughout the day. And so we can appreciate that this is a loved one that's stuck. And often with something that approximates a disease in some ways, it's really taken a hold, and it's going to be a real hard behavior to change with time. And so I would have that in mind at first, that it's going to be a hard behavior to stop. And then I would do similar strategies to what we've mentioned before, which is to, express your concern, let them know that there's a range of treatment options and you're there to help them and just sort of stick by them. I think we've gotten away from this idea of when someone's struggling to let them hit rock bottom, to kick them to the curb or the street. We want to keep a healthy distance to them without abandoning them and without enabling them, and sort of riding that fine line to keep them close enough where when they're ready, they'll get care. And we know substance use spikes in the late teens and into the 20s, and then it starts going down. Other things become more rewarding: relationships, having families, jobs, all those things. And so if you can stick it out with most people, even if they've been stuck for years, they're going to age out of the behavior. The brain's going to keep developing, and to still have you around when they're ready, I think, is really important.
Okay, how about someone had asked what devices are out there to detect vaping? I know that we just, the work that we do in Hastings, there are devices that you can purchase to put in school bathrooms that detect vaping, but if any of you two want to comment about that.
I can talk briefly on so yeah, there's certainly these devices that one puts in schools. What the youth nicotine epidemic has caused is a resurgence in urine screenings. And there's a lot of mixed thoughts on this. And the worst thing about urine screening is if you're using it to bust people. That is, you're using it to, you know, get the negative screen and then to punish. We use urine screens to reward people. That is, to set up these contracts with kids where if they get a negative urine screen for nicotine or for marijuana, then you reward them. They get to stay out later with their friends. They get X, Y, whatever's rewarding to them. And so, you know, because we can't detect these products, we're often doing these urine screens, but we're just trying to figure out a way where it's not more of these "I got you" moments and distancing moments, you know, where they're buying fake urine online as a result, but rather, you know, this opportunity to reward them and to be excited about it, make it challenging, fun, interesting, that sort of thing. But it's a slippery slope, and the current recommendation, although pediatricians aren't following it, is that pediatricians actually urine screen folks at yearly visits to see what nicotine and substances they have, but they're sort of reluctant to do it too because they don't know what to do if it's positive. And so it's still in this nebulous territory, but increasingly families are urine screening.
And as Dr. Avery mentioned, there are devices for schools. There's one called FlySense. There's a few out there. FlySense was really the original. You know, they are likely effective in detecting, you know, vapor, and they're put in bathrooms. And they're also, when you get those, you get mock ones. So the kids don't necessarily know which ones are real and which ones aren't. But the truth is that, unfortunately, you know, I think kids, if they want to or need to vape, they're going to find a way to do it at school, during school, after school. So I'm not sure how effective that's going to be in helping our kids. I think it might help the school feel better, but I'm not sure if your child needs to vape, that's going to help.
Okay, Mimi, we have a question about with the ban going in place and marijuana in the process of being legalized, it will make it easier to get access to THC for vaping. Are you working to create policies now in anticipation of legalization?
So because we're all volunteers and most of us are volunteers, we have grown out a little bit, but our space is really around youth vaping prevention, and now more broadly, all tobacco products. We are trying to get a ban on all flavored tobacco products because, frankly, kids will use whatever they can get their hands on, especially once they're addicted. They're going to go for the flavored cigarillo or whatever it is. So we are really mostly focused on getting bans on flavored tobacco products, recognizing THC is a problem. And we definitely, you know, support people around it, but we're really not focused on the THC bans or legislation.
I'll just mention briefly, more kids get in trouble with alcohol and than any of these substances too, to keep in mind. And there's flavored alcohol beverages coming. I mean, that's part of the youth, the adult surge is all these flavored seltzers and Truly and White Claw and all these things. And so, you know, we equally worry about heavy youth alcohol use, and as we do with weed and nicotine. And so, you know, you're more likely to have accidents on alcohol, and it's very addictive and problematic as well.
Okay. We have another question about how to educate children when the parents have a history of smoking nicotine products and are perhaps trying to quit themselves or haven't actually begun to try to quit. Any thoughts around that?
That's hard. I mean, that's a tough space to be in as a kid, as a family. You know, when there are multiple members in a family suffering with substance use disorders, and that's not. I mean, if the data is right, a third to two-thirds of us in any room have a primary family member with substance use. I mean, it's something we're all impacted by and struggling with our own use as much as our kids' use, and so. I'd say as much as we can make it open, honest on both ends. I think parents often shy away from telling kids about their own struggles with addiction or mental health issues. If you think your kid doesn't know that you have a substance use problem or mental health issues, I've got something to tell you because they are so aware. They know something's going on. If you can name it for them, it takes such relief off them. Even if the name is addiction, you know, it goes a long way for them saying, ah, I understand. I can be mindful of my own behavior. I can, like my parent, talk about it. But it's a sensitive, it's a tough space, and you know, addiction ruins so many lives, and we'd rather forget about it and move on at times. And so, even if you have recovered, I'd say still tell your kid early and often about that, even if it's not an active struggle, because I think it can go a long way.
Okay. Okay, we have another one here that's, what's the current law in New York surrounding store owners that are selling nicotine products to minors? My child's told me about other kids that purchase their vaping devices from stores nearby. What should I do? I think you may have mentioned this, Mimi, about you can report, but if you want to maybe repeat that information.
Yeah, I mean, so you can report the store to the FDA. You could also report to the state AG, the Attorney General's office, by going online and looking. There's also, I'm sure New York City might have its own reporting lines, but you know, unfortunately, it is happening it's quite rampant, not only in New York, but across the country. And our numbers in New York, Linda and I were just talking about this, are no better, and they're in fact, sadly, worse in some cases than the state data. I mean, the country data, it's countrywide. So it is still happening. I think the flavor ban has been a great milestone. I think now we need to see better enforcement. And unfortunately, you know, I think, again, I think people, the law enforcement, everyone's very distracted right now between COVID and the social justice issues around New York and the country. So I would definitely say, if you know of a store, I would report them to the state AG. They do take it under advisement. So they do take it seriously.
Okay. How about how to combat older siblings of friends who may be an influence?
Yeah, that's tricky. Curious what Mimi suggests as well. I mean, it's hard. The friend group's very hard to modify, even in the primary. Friends are tough. I mean, friends are number one in kids' life at that age, right? And so, I think the good news about peer groups these days is that they're increasingly using less. Like 2 years ago, I couldn't say, do you have anyone in your peer groups that has stopped vaping? Now everyone has one or two people in their peer group that stopped vaping. I always say, let's look at your peers now. Look who's using. 2 to 3 years from now, it's going to start picking people off. And you're going to see people either quit or get into trouble. It's not the seductive future it appears to be right now. And then when the use is sort of like 1 degree removed, when it's a sibling's friend, other things, I think we just got to get everyone in the same room in the family and to talk about it, talk about the concerns, and talk to the older brother, sister about your friends and your concern for the little ones. I think just talking and talking is the key. Mimi, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, whether it's a sibling or an older sibling's, a friend, I think the problem is that it's all around them right now, right? It's at every party. It's, even sadly among the athletes, although athletes unfortunately are starting to realize, or fortunately, that it's impacting their capacity to be good athletes. So I think people are learning. I think we have more information than we've ever had. And it's really just about trying to teach kids to say no, and that they don't have to partake. I think we need to flip this on its head as a society and get it to the point where, like with cigarettes, you know, you see someone smoking now, it doesn't look that cool anymore, you know? So, you know, trying to flip it on its head and saying, you know, it's not that cool. So you're sucking on this device and this plume. I mean, it's actually quite disgusting when you really think about it, but that's quite kind of a long way away. And so I think it's just, you know, being able to understand the health harms and, you know, whether it's an older sibling or a peer, be able to say no. And sometimes having a good excuse helps. So I know, like with my son, you know, I think he tends not to give in to peer pressure, but I've always said, look, you know, tell him you're being nicotine tested. You have urine tests at home. If that helps, use me, blame me. Or, you know, you can just say, look, I'm an athlete. I can't risk it, you know, or there are good reasons that you can come up with. And most of the time, I think people aren't going to, you know, pressure you, try to force you.
This is a good mention. We haven't talked about refusal skills too much, but it is worthwhile to think with kids about ways to say no. And I always say, make the parent the bad guy is fine. As maybe you're saying, you know, my parents are so terrible that they're going to urine scream me and not let me do this. I'm such a badass that, you know, I can't do it. Like if you get that narrative, that's a positive thing. And but I would practice with the kid ways to say no. And the kid that just says confidently, not for me, you know, sometimes that's just sufficient. I mean, if you can just own it, then kids respect that. Especially these days, people are respecting kids' choices more than ever. There's not the peer pressure that I think I remember when I was a kid. People seem to be pretty respectful of people in their recovery or saying no these days.
Okay, Mimi, I think this might be for you. New York has banned flavored e-cigarettes. What about unflavored? Are all e-cigs illegal?
No. So what has been left on the market under Governor Cuomo's new bill that went into effect in May is unflavored and flavorless, and tobacco flavored vapes are still allowed. So those are still on the market and allowed to be sold. Also not supposed to be sold to minors, but they are allowed on the market.
Okay. And then here's a clarification, Dr. Avery. I think when you were speaking earlier, we have a participant that, or an audience member who just wants to know if you had said that vaping affects how you do tasks like marijuana does. Can you just clarify that if that's-
You do what, I'm sorry?
What?
How you do what?
How you do tasks. Like, I guess does it affect your ability performance?
I think Mimi had a good slide on that too. It affects working memory. It affects basically what happens. You learn based on what your environment is, right? So you're cued by, say if you're studying with nicotine and then you're taking a test of nicotine withdrawal, you can just imagine how your body's not cued to remember and learn in that way. And there are kids that get to the point where they can't even take an exam. They have to puff it during class because all their learning is associated with the nicotine. And so you don't want to encode learning to be associated with a product that you put into your body. And that's what happens with nicotine. It seems like it impacts working memory. Certainly if your lungs start getting in bad shape, your vasculature starts getting in bad shape, none of this is pro brain health on the upstream. If your reward pathway is hijacked, you know, that gets in the way of getting the dopamine spike about the good grade, about, you know, taking care of that functional stuff. And so there's a lot of like immediate and downstream ways that it can get in the way of educational goals.
Okay, another question is, how do you advise handling a teenager who consistently denies vaping, even though you know that he or she does?
That's all you. I'm going to listen.
I mean, that's hard. And to start with, kids lie all the time. If you think your kid's not lying, it's got something else to tell you today. And so I would just assume your child is lying in small and big ways all the time, just as we lie in small and big ways all the time. I would go with the assumption so it doesn't wound you later that it's happening, and it's going to happen. And I think it's just a very poor way of dismissing the idea. And so I would maintain your cool, keep being open and honest in an ongoing way that it's something you're worried about. You know, if it's not vaping, then something's cooking. So you got to tell me what's going on. If not now, later. and just highlight it as an important way. If you can sneak in urine testing in some magic sleight of hand way, I think that can go a long way of setting rewards. But the worry is that it becomes this like a terrible tug of war once you start getting those things in and you push the person farther away. So the dance, as we talked about, is to keep them close, even if you know they're lying or continuing the problematic behavior, and just being ready to pounce when they're ready. Because as much as they seem like an alien who's never going to agree in the moment, and you know, a future sociopath or criminal, there's a part of them that does also want to be that good kid who connects with his parent and come along. And so if you can hang in there, then when that kid presents itself, then you can, you know, seize the moment. But it takes a lot of patience, and it can be very hard for sure.
Okay, I think we just had one other question. I'm not sure you guys know this, but I will read it out just in case. But we've been asked if there's been any public backlash or legal action against media influence about vaping, like Netflix shows and movies that, you know, blatantly producing entertainment targeted at youths that involve vapes. Either one of you have any information on that, or if not, that's fine as well. I don't actually know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been some advocacy around it. I'm not sure about any legal action, but I know that there has been some advocacy. I'm not even sure. I think Common Sense Media might have been doing something, but because they're you know, generally in that space. But I have heard of it. I mean, right now we're fighting so hard just to get the flavors off the market, trying to get these products off the market. But that would definitely be the next level of advocacy. Is that, and also fighting for treatment for kids, because I think it's very hard, you know, through insurance and all of that. I'm sure that some kids and families struggle on making the decision between, you know, getting help and having to pay for it, but making help accessible and more accessible to more families. But have not heard anything specific about legal action to the media.
No, and I would just add, because it's, you know, would be potentially a great opportunity just to talk to your kids when you're watching those shows with them and you see kids vaping. It's just a nice opening for a conversation. So I think, Lisa, that may be, unless you see anything else in that I might have missed, but I think that, okay, there's one more. What is the smallest habit you would call addicted? Like what the lowest consumption amount that would potentially define addiction? Is that a question you can answer?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. The formal sort of definition of addiction or a substance use disorder is basically use of a substance over time that impairs function, sort of gets in the way of you accomplishing what you want in the day or in life. And it's hard because, and it's sort of unfair in that, I mean, with drinking, it's sometimes the obvious. Someone can drink 21 drinks a week, which is sort of above the at-risk for men or women, which are sort of 14 or 7 drinks, and not have a alcohol use disorder because their body metabolizes it in the right way. They, you know, still function. And someone could drink 5 drinks a week, but all in one setting, it can really mess them up in a way that they end up with, you know, problems and functional impairment from that. And so it's real hard to tie addiction to the amount of any substance. And then that includes for using nicotine and vaping. Because there are folks, especially those with a family history of addiction, and especially those with co-occurring depression, anxiety, who can really be spun up even by a small amount of these devices. And if you think about it, say you use a substance at a party on Saturday night and you're prone to anxiety. What happens Saturday night is that you end up not sleeping as well. So you wake up not rested and within a little subtle withdrawal from the substance, and you start feeling anxious. And that can start a cycle that even with one night of substance use for that person can really mess up their whole week, result in a primary mental health issue developing. Um, and it's not fair because like, I just used once and I feel miserable for weeks, and then their friend will be puffing all day and not get into trouble till much later. And so I think that is the unfairness overall of addiction, and why it's so hard to tie them out to what's considered a substance use disorder.
Dr. Avery, was there, I remember something, it was either you or another doctor was saying there are a couple of cues, like a self-test, if you will. One of them might be if you have to, when you wake up in the morning, if you feel the craving to vape and you need to vape. There were a few of those, I think I recall.
Right, you certainly know it's taken a hold when you need to use first thing in the morning. And that's true for marijuana, for nicotine. Once it starts being cued to all sorts of behaviors, from waking up to what to do after school, once it becomes the answer to all these questions, you know you're in trouble. And I think the hard thing is that often the folks who have the substance use disorder are the last people to see the functional impairment from it. And so that makes it harder than other diseases where it's sort of obvious you have the cancer, you have high blood pressure. Addiction's one of those where it takes a while in that it's a brain disease until you know that it's got you. And so, especially in these subtler forms of use, it can be a little tricky.
Okay, great. Well, we're about to run out of time, and I did want to thank you, Mimi and Dr. Avery, for joining us tonight and sharing such valuable information. I did also want to quickly share with everybody that's attending our next edition in December, which will focus on youth mental health, supporting our teens in these challenging times. And as Dr. Avery alluded to, there are a lot of gray areas, overlapping areas that we think play into helping to support our teens in making healthy choices. So we hope that you will join us. You can register for the next event on our website, www.no2prevent.org. And with that, we hope that we will see you all in December. And thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank you.